Remember that before the pandemic, one of the issues we spoke about almost all the time was about land. It's an issue that we will continue to talk about for some time to come. A new bill to change the Constitution, as I understand it, has been agreed to in Parliamentary Committee, but there's no clarity, really, on whether the Constitution will be changed to allow for expropriation without compensation. And this issue, as you know, gets to the heart of our past, but it also seems to be very difficult as a society to agree on what we should do. So, are there proposals to perhaps make some sort of change? The Chief Economist of the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, Wandile Sihlobo, has suggested there could be a way to make this easier. Wandile, good afternoon to you. As I understand it, you're suggesting that there be an agency that be created. How would this work?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and your listeners. We really here, Stephen, building on the proposal that was put on the table by the President. You may recall, Stephen, in his State of the Nation address, that he mentioned that there must be some bit of an agency that will deal with some of the blockages that we've seen on land reform. And our addition onto this is to say, if you establish a national agency and its task is really to focus on redistribution leg of land reform and leave the restitution as well as tenure within the government. The setup of it really needs both the public sector as well as in the private sector participants. It might have a national structure, which is we're trying to suggest in some of our papers, but also work in a more decentralized way as the structure that was envisaged also even within the NDP. So that's that PPP approach that we are coming up with in this particular structure. Representation of private sector, representation of farmers at a district level, identifying land for redistribution. Some will be donated and some might be bought by government, and then we'll follow through all of the other processes of selecting the beneficiaries via the government legislation.
So then what powers would this agency actually have? I mean, it would have to have some form of legal power in some way.
Yeah, it would have to have those legal powers, Stephen, you are right, and it would derive those, perhaps maybe the Minister of Agriculture will be the one to look into that. Perhaps you can look at the Land Bank Act and see if it can be extended to accommodate this, or establish a new legislative power. But I think if you are establishing a new one, it will take some time. I mean, we want an agency that at least within the near term, when the next couple of months could be set up, it could look into saying, in the goodwill that do exist in a private sector as well in the public, of some that are looking at donating the land resources and some that want to contribute to land reform. How do you formalize those into a much more formal structure that is run by both private sector and the public sector, and make sure that it contributes to redistribution? And I think, Stephen, it would also be a one-stop shop for many of the things, because what has made land reform to fail over the years is it's not only just the fact that, land prices are higher and all of the other things that have been incited, but it's also the institutional framework of the state and the capacity issues. So this agency, in a way, on a redistribution angle, it could begin to address some of those hindrances.
I mean, look, any progress towards land redistribution might take some of the heat out of the issue. I mean, not all of it, of course, because of what it actually is. It's about land. But how would you decide who's on the agency? And I say this because, Wandile, I don't need to tell you how people argue about land and why it's so important and why, in many cases, it's so emotional, legitimately so. So how would we decide who actually goes in the agency, who runs it?
I think at a national level, those selections would have to be made by the minister on who decides who sits there. But our framework is that at a district level, the branches, you would want to have at least let's say, a district of Humansdorp in the Eastern Cape. You would want to have about 5 commercial farmers that would sit there, 5 commercial white farmers sitting there, and also some 5 black farmers or potentially black farmers that would sit in that structure. I mentioned them in that setup because these will be the people who would be responsible for saying who is the right jockey to benefit on this agency, and obviously guided by the national legislation like the beneficiary selection criteria. But you need the commercial white farmers on the table so that they can speak to other commercial farmers that are there to say, where are the land parcels that some of the farmers could donate? And obviously there's a range of nudges that we put in there, or incentives that will incentivize the farmers to be able to donate that land, starting from some of the tax rebates that the farmers would get, the BEE points, and a range of others. So I think it would need to be that set up so that it is a social compact approach, and at a district level, but the national structure is for providing those guidelines and also meeting quarterly to check if there is progress. And Stephen, there is already some of the projects like this. For example, the Pearls project, some of the colleagues that are doing this work. So what we are saying here is that what can you learn and extract from them and try to formalize a structure that would be under the government and to an extent private sector and drive this process. That's exactly what we're putting on the table.
I mean, part of this would also be, and I mean, you know, solutions that involve the economy and actually make economic sense tend to have a much greater likelihood of working. Never mind the rights and wrongs and legitimacies of it. It's just economics is so important. How would you ensure then that the land that is moved or transferred or the ownership has changed then gets into the value chain? If you can get it into the value chain, you're going to have a sustainable farm, you're going to have a long-term sustainable solution that everyone will be happy with.
Absolutely. Those are some of the points that we do emphasize there. And I think some of the key prerequisites is ensuring that once the land is under the agency, when it's being transferred to some of the black beneficiaries, it really goes with the long-term tradable rights or the title deeds, which is the one first step. But also the commercial farmers that sit in the agency, they are able to then align the new beneficiary with some of the existing farmer association and some of the existing value chain so that there are production loans that do follow that beneficiary. And then once they get on with the production, they are nicely linked with some of the value chain institutions, which would be the takers of that produce. So it's really to calibrate on that and ensure that the economic part of the land reform it does come to fruition, because at the end, Stephen, I mean, we have high unemployment in the rural South Africa, lack of economic activity. So you want land reform to be done, yes, addressing the economic injustices of the past, but at the same time addressing the economic issues that we do face today as a country.
Do you think, I mean, there's an awful lot of cynicism around land reform that, you know, maybe government officials will be first in the queue, that kind of thing. There's some evidence that that has happened, maybe not a huge amount, but, I mean, would this system also get around that particular problem? Let me put it like this, it will stop that worry.
Yeah, I think it would stop that worrying. And I mean, let's give credit here, Stephen, to the government on this one, and also perhaps maybe to the panel that I sat in, which was advising the president, because we had came up, Stephen, there with what we called the beneficiary selection criteria. What that criteria began to do was to clarify on who should benefit from land reform. And now the government and cabinet did adopt that it is now rule of the law. So it does clarify who should qualify. And all of those that are politically exposed, they'll pretty much be set aside. So I do think that it would select the right people. But now with the PPP approach, it puts the beneficiary at the best position of succeeding, because you will be coming into the land reform processes already linked with some of the people who have been succeeding in agriculture for a while. And I think that would lead to commercialization of agriculture in a more aggressive way than the failures we've seen in the past.
I mean, whenever we talk about what this does, I suppose, and maybe the genius of what you're suggesting, and tell me if I've got this right, is that it removes the adversarial nature of the current process we have, where you have a land claim, someone opposes it, and everyone goes off to court. This would be, from what you're saying to me, seems to be a lot less adversarial.
Absolutely, Stephen, because this focuses only on one leg of land reform, which is redistribution. Then all of the other legs, for example, the land tenure, where somebody claims that their forefathers owned a certain piece of land and all of those processes, those will still go and be handled by the National Department, as it currently is the case, and also the issues of land tenure. But in as far as the redistribution, this will be the institution that I think it would lead some bit of success. Because the goal here is to say, where can we find much land supply? Where can we find all of these white farmers we hear about every day that they are willing to contribute to land reform? Is there a structure to accommodate them that is formal? And then would they also, those that can't contribute financially or by land, but contribute by linking the beneficiaries to the know-how that is necessary for success? And there must be formal instruments for that to pretty much be done. But still, it must be a slim structure so that it's not heavy on the fiscus, but at the same time, it is effective in the process. And it aligns with the vision of the president, which he stated in the SONA.
Do you think it's going to be adopted, Wandile? I mean, you've got a little bit of lobbying to do with some of the politicians?
I am hopeful. I am hopeful because, I mean, what's the alternative? We want to see success here. And if we are serious about land reform, I do think that we should test some of these models that we are putting on the table. And I hope that the minister and the president will be warming up to this idea.
Wandile Sihlobo, thank you, Chief Economist of the Agriculture Business Chamber of South Africa. I really do appreciate the time. It's an interesting idea at a time when people maybe haven't been focusing as much on land as they have, but I guarantee you it's an issue that's going to come back. Wandile Sihlobo, thanks very much indeed.